The invitation arrived on parchment so fine it felt like silk between Lorelei's fingers. But the words, written in gold ink, might as well have been carved with daggers into her heart. 5 years had passed since Alpha King Marmon Richmond destroyed her world with 3 simple words. You are Barren. Now he was inviting her to watch him claim another woman as his Luna, completely unaware that she had given birth to his 4 children. 4 alpha children whose very existence would shatter everything he believed about bloodlines, loyalty, and the lies that had torn their family apart. Morning sunlight streamed through the small windows of Lorelei Richmond's cottage in Shadowvale, casting golden patterns across bundles of drying herbs that hung from the wooden beams. The scent of lavender and chamomile filled the air as she moved quietly through her kitchen, preparing breakfast for 4 energetic children who would soon come tumbling down from the loft above. This peaceful routine had become her sanctuary over the past 5 years. After fleeing Crimson Dawnpack in disgrace, she had built this simple life from nothing, finding purpose in healing others and raising her children far from the politics and cruelty of royal courts. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, slicing bread and setting the kettle to boil, when 3 sharp knocks echoed through the morning stillness. Lorelei froze. No one in Shadowvale knocked with such formal precision. The village was too small for ceremony, too remote for strangers bearing official business. Her heart began to race as she wiped her hands on her apron and approached the door, every instinct warning her that this moment would change everything. When she opened the door, morning light revealed a young messenger in the crimson and gold livery of the royal court. Behind him, 2 horses stamped nervously in the cool air, their breath creating small clouds of mist. The messenger's face was pale and drawn, his eyes holding the particular strain that came from carrying news no one wanted to deliver. Lady Lorelei Richmond? His voice cracked slightly on her name, as if speaking it aloud made him nervous. She hadn't been called by that name in 5 years. Here in Shadowvale, she was simply Lorelei the Healer, the quiet widow who kept to herself and asked no questions about anyone's past. Hearing her full name spoken with such formality made her stomach clench with dread. You have the wrong person, she said automatically, already moving to close the door. Please. The messenger thrust forward an envelope sealed with crimson wax, bearing the official crest of the Crimson Dawnpack. I was instructed to deliver this personally and await your response. If I return without confirmation of delivery, He swallowed hard, genuine fear flickering in his young eyes. Against every instinct screaming at her to refuse, Lorelei took the envelope. The wax seal cracked under her thumb with a sound like breaking bones, and the parchment unfolded to reveal elegant script written in gold ink. By royal decree of Alpha King Marmon Richmond, sovereign of the Crimson Dawnpack, and lord of the Eastern Territories. All former pack members are cordially invited to witness the sacred mating ceremony between His Royal Majesty and Lady Kathleen Mills of the Northern Territories. The ceremony shall commence at the next full moon. Your attendance is requested to honor the continuation of the royal bloodline and witness the dawn of a new era for our pack. Lorelei read the words twice, 3 times, waiting for them to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. A mating ceremony. Marmon was taking a new Luna, and he was inviting his former pack members to witness it, including her, the woman he had publicly declared barren and worthless before casting her out in disgrace. The irony cut like a silver blade through her chest. She was being invited to watch her former mate claim another woman, to sit in some distant corner of the Great Hall and smile politely while he spoke vows of eternal devotion to someone else. The same man who had once whispered promises under starlit skies, who had traced patterns on her skin while murmuring about the children they would have together, was now asking her to celebrate his happiness with another woman. Mama? A small voice from behind her made Lorelei spin around, her heart lurching. Isaac stood at the bottom of the wooden ladder that led to the loft, his gray eyes, so much like his father's, fixed on the messenger with an intensity no 5-year-old should possess. Of all her children, Isaac had always been the most perceptive, the natural leader who seemed to understand far more than his years should allow. Who is he? Isaac demanded. and his small body positioning itself protectively between his mother and the stranger. "Why do you smell scared?" "I'm not scared, little wolf." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. "Go back upstairs and wake your brothers and sister. I'll have breakfast ready soon." Isaac didn't move. His gray eyes narrowed as he studied her face, then shifted to the parchment in her trembling hands. Even at 5 years old, he possessed an alpha's instinct for reading situations and people. "You're lying. I can smell it." Of course he could. All 4 of her children had inherited that particular gift from their father, along with enhanced strength, intelligence, and intuition that marked them as something special. Something that would make them targets if the wrong people discovered their existence. Isaac." Lorelai kept her voice steady through sheer force of will. "Upstairs. Now." For a long moment her son held her gaze with a defiance that was entirely his own. Then his eyes flashed briefly gold, just for an instant, and he turned to climb back up the ladder, his small shoulders rigid with tension. Lorelai waited until she heard the creak of floorboards above before turning back to the messenger, who was staring at the spot where Isaac had been standing with wide, confused eyes. "Did that child's eyes just—" the messenger began. "You saw nothing," Lorelai said sharply. "And you'll speak of nothing. Do you understand?" The messenger nodded quickly, clearly wanting nothing more than to complete his task and leave. "Will you be attending the ceremony, Lady Richmond? I need to bring word back to the court." Lorelai looked down at the invitation in her hands, at the elegant script that summoned her to witness her replacement. For 5 years, she had been hiding, surviving, building a life from the ashes of her former existence. For 5 years, she had told her children that their father was dead, killed in battle before they were born, because the truth was too dangerous and too painful to share. But the truth had a way of demanding recognition. Her children were growing stronger every day, their abilities becoming harder to hide. Isaac's brief flash of alpha eyes was just the beginning. Soon, all 4 of them would manifest powers that marked them as royal bloodline. Powers that would raise questions she wasn't prepared to answer. "Tell them I'll be there," she heard herself say, in the words leaving her mouth before she could stop them. The messenger's eyes widened. "You'll attend willingly?" Lorelai folded the invitation carefully, her decision crystallizing into something hard and unbreakable in her chest. For 5 years, she had been running from the truth. For 5 years, she had let Marmon's rejection define her worth and her future. But her children deserved better than a mother who hid in shadows, and she deserved better than a life built on shame for sins she had never committed. "Tell them I'll be there," she repeated, her voice growing stronger. "But tell them this as well. I won't be coming alone." The messenger practically fled to his horse, mounting with clumsy haste and spurring the animal down the winding path that led back toward the main road. Lorelai watched him go until he disappeared between the trees, then closed the door and leaned against it, the invitation crumpling slightly in her grip. From upstairs came the sounds of her children waking. Dermond's grumpy protests about being roused early, Lyra's gentle voice trying to soothe him, Wyatt's excited chatter about dreams of golden wolves running through moonlit forests. The sounds of her family, the family she had protected and nurtured through 5 years of exile. The family that Marmon had never known existed. Lorelai straightened her shoulders and smoothed the invitation against her apron. Whatever came next, whatever dangers awaited them at Crimson Dawn, her children deserved to know their heritage. They deserved to understand why they were special, why their abilities marked them as more than common wolves. And Marmon Richmond deserved to learn exactly what his blindness and cruelty had cost him. The sound of 4 pairs of small feet thundering down the ladder filled the cottage as her children emerged for breakfast, their young faces bright with curiosity about the strange visitor. As Lorelai looked at them, Isaac with his protective instincts, Dermond with his fierce independence, Lyra with her gentle wisdom, and Wyatt with his dreamy intuition, she felt something shift inside her chest. For 5 years, she had been Lorelai the Exile, the broken Luna who had been cast aside for her supposed failures. Today, she would begin the transformation back into who she had always been meant to be. Lorelei Richmond, mother of 4 alpha children, and the woman who would make an entire pack confront the lies they had chosen to believe. The children gathered around the simple wooden table as Lorelei served breakfast, their young faces bright with curiosity about the morning's unexpected visitor. She moved through the familiar routine of pouring milk and distributing portions of bread with honey, but her mind was elsewhere, pulled inexorably back to memories she had spent 5 years trying to bury. "Mama, who was that man?" Wyatt asked, his pale blue eyes wide with innocent curiosity. At 5 years old, he was the youngest by mere minutes, born last in a delivery that had shocked the village midwife with its rarity. 4 healthy children, all bearing the unmistakable signs of alpha heritage, born to a woman the royal court had declared barren. "Just a messenger, little one," Lorelei replied, settling into her chair with practiced calm. "Sometimes people send messages from far away." "He smelled like horses and fear," Dermot observed matter-of-factly, his dark hair still tousled from sleep. Of all her children, Dermot was the most direct, possessed of a blunt honesty that sometimes startled adults who expected more deference from someone so young. "People often feel nervous when they have important messages to deliver," Lorelei explained, though her heart ached at how perceptive her children were. Their enhanced senses, inherited from their father's bloodline, made it nearly impossible to hide strong emotions from them. Lyra, quiet and observant as always, studied her mother's face with unsettling intensity. "You're sad," she said softly. Not scared like Dermot said, but sad. Deep down sad. Lorelei's breath caught. Of all her children, Lyra possessed the strongest empathic abilities, able to sense emotions with an accuracy that sometimes felt like magic. Her pale green eyes seemed to see straight through any pretense to the truth beneath. "Sometimes grown-ups feel complicated things," Lorelei said carefully. "Feelings that are hard to explain." Isaac had remained silent throughout the exchange, but now he set down his cup with deliberate precision. "It was about our father, wasn't it?" he asked quietly. The message was about him. The cottage fell silent except for the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Lorelei felt her heart hammering against her ribs as 4 pairs of eyes fixed on her with varying degrees of understanding. She had always known this day would come, when their questions would grow too pointed to deflect with gentle evasions. For 5 years, and she had told them their father was a brave warrior who had died in battle before they were born. It was easier than explaining that their father was alive and ruling a pack hundreds of miles away, completely unaware of their existence because he had rejected their mother based on lies and political manipulation. "Your father died before you were born," she said, the familiar words feeling heavier than usual on her tongue. "I've told you this many times, but people don't send messages about dead people," Isaac persisted, his gray eyes holding a stubbornness that reminded her painfully of Marmon. "Unless something changes, unless something happens that makes the dead important again." Lorelei closed her eyes briefly, remembering another conversation from years ago, when a different kind of message had changed everything. She had been 23 then, newly mated to the young Alpha King, glowing with happiness and secure in the belief that their love could overcome any obstacle. The memory rose unbidden, standing in the royal physician's chambers while Master Ralph Doolin examined her with cold, clinical efficiency. She had been trying to conceive for 6 months, and while that wasn't unusual for young mates, Marmon's mother had insisted on a thorough medical evaluation. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," Master Doolin had said, his weathered face grave with false sympathy. "The examinations are conclusive. Lady Lorelei's reproductive system shows signs of severe damage. She is, unfortunately, completely barren. There is no possibility of natural conception." The words had hit her like a physical blow. Barren. The worst possible fate for a Luna, whose primary duty was to produce heirs to secure the bloodline. She had stared at the physician in shock, knowing with absolute certainty that something was wrong, that his assessment contradicted everything she felt in her own body. That's impossible, she had whispered. I feel perfectly healthy. Perhaps if we waited longer, tried different approaches. I understand this is difficult to accept, Master Doolin had replied smoothly, producing a leather folder thick with official-looking documents. But the medical evidence is clear. Continued attempts at conception would only cause unnecessary emotional distress for both you and His Majesty. The physician had left her alone with the devastating news, and when Marmon arrived an hour later, she had seen immediately that he already knew. His face was set in hard lines, and his gray eyes cold with disappointment, and something that might have been disgust. How long have you known? He had asked without preamble. Known what? She had replied, still reeling from the physician's pronouncement. Don't lie to me, Lorelei. How long have you known you couldn't bear children? The accusation had stolen her breath. I didn't know. I don't believe it's true. Marmon, please, we need to get a second opinion. Consult other healers. The evidence is conclusive. His voice had been flat, emotionless. Master Doolin is the most respected physician in the kingdom. Are you suggesting he's lying? I'm suggesting he's wrong, she had said desperately. I know my own body. I know something isn't right about this. But Marmon had already turned away, his shoulders rigid with rejection. I need time to think about our options. Their options. As if she were a problem to be solved rather than his mate. The woman he had sworn to love and protect above all others. The woman who had given up her own pack, her own family, to join her life to his. Mama? Wyatt's small hand on her arm brought her back to the present. You're crying. Lorelei touched her cheek in surprise, finding it wet with tears she hadn't realized were falling. All 4 children were staring at her with worry and confusion, their young faces reflecting the pain they could sense but didn't understand. I'm sorry, she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Sometimes memories make people sad, even when they don't mean to think about them. Was our father really a warrior? Lyra asked quietly, and her empathic abilities clearly picking up the complex emotions swirling through the cottage. Lorelei looked at her daughter's pale, serious face and felt something crack inside her chest. These children deserved the truth, or at least as much of it as they could understand. They deserved to know they came from strength and power, not shame and rejection. Yes, she said finally. Your father was the strongest warrior I ever knew. He was brave and proud, and people looked up to him. They followed him because they believed in him. Did you love him? Lyra's question was barely a whisper. The simple question pierced through all of Lorelei's carefully constructed defenses. She closed her eyes and remembered Marmon as he had been in those early days, young and passionate, his hands gentle as he braided flowers in her hair, and his voice rough with emotion as he spoke vows under the full moon. Yes, she whispered. I loved him very much. Did he love you? Isaac asked, his perceptive gaze missing nothing. Lorelei's throat tightened. How could she explain the complexity of what had existed between them? The desperate love that had once burned bright enough to light up entire rooms, then twisted into something ugly by lies and manipulation? I thought he did, she said carefully. But sometimes people make choices that hurt the ones they're supposed to protect. Sometimes they listen to the wrong voices and believe things that aren't true. That's stupid, Dermot declared with 5-year-old certainty. If someone loves you, they should believe you over everyone else. That's what love means. His words hit her like arrows finding their mark. Yet from the mouths of babes came wisdom that adults seemed incapable of grasping. Love should mean trust. Love should mean fighting for each other instead of giving up at the first sign of trouble. You're right, she said softly. That is what love should mean. The children seemed to sense that they had pushed as far as their mother was willing to go for now. They finished breakfast in thoughtful silence, then scattered to their various activities. Isaac helping with dishes, Dermot practicing with wooden swords in the garden, Lyra tending to her collection of injured woodland creatures, and Wyatt drawing pictures of the golden wolves that populated his dreams. Lorelai moved through her morning routine mechanically, her mind churning with memories and possibilities. The invitation sat on the kitchen counter like an accusation, its golden script catching the light whenever she passed. Each time she looked at it, she felt the same mixture of rage and determination that had sustained her through the darkest days of her exile. By noon, she had made her decision. "Children," she called, gathering them in the main room. "We're going on a journey." 4 pairs of eyes fixed on her with immediate attention. Isaac stepped forward slightly, unconsciously positioning himself as their spokesman. "Where are we going?" he asked. "To see people who knew your father," Lorelai said carefully. "Important people who live far away. We'll need to pack our best clothes and prepare for several days of travel." "Why now?" Dermond demanded, his suspicious nature immediately alert to the strangeness of the timing. Lorelai looked at her children, her brave, intelligent, then powerful children who had been hidden away for too long, and felt her resolve crystallize into something unbreakable. "Because it's time," she said simply. "It's time for you to learn about where you come from, and it's time for some people to learn about you." The children exchanged glances, that silent communication they had developed in the womb allowing them to reach consensus without words. Finally, Isaac nodded gravely. "When do we leave?" he asked. "Tomorrow at dawn," Lorelai replied. "Pack only what you truly need. This journey will change everything." As her children scattered to prepare, Lorelai stood in the cottage that had been their sanctuary for 5 years and felt the weight of the future settling on her shoulders. Tomorrow, they would begin the journey back to Crimson Dawnpack, back to the place where her heart had been broken and her life had been shattered. But this time, she wouldn't be returning as the broken, defeated woman who had fled in disgrace. She would be returning as the mother of 4 alpha children, armed with the truth that would expose every lie that had been told about her. And Marmon Richmond would finally learn exactly what his blindness and cruelty had cost him. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cottage floor as Lorelai moved through the familiar rooms, gathering belongings for their journey. Each item she selected carried weight beyond its practical use. Clothes that would present her children with dignity, medicines that might be needed, and small treasures that had become precious during their years of exile. Her children had thrown themselves into preparation with the enthusiasm of youth, but she could sense the undercurrent of questions building beneath their excitement. They had lived their entire lives in the peaceful isolation of Shadowvale, knowing only the simple routines of village life. The prospect of traveling to meet important people had captured their imagination, but their enhanced intuition told them this journey carried deeper significance than their mother was revealing. "Mama, why do we need fancy clothes to meet Father's friends?" Wyatt asked from his spot near the window, where he was carefully folding his best tunic. His pale blue eyes held the dreamy quality that marked him as different from his siblings, as if he saw layers of reality that escaped others. "Because these are very formal people," Lorelai explained, smoothing wrinkles from Lyra's green dress. "They have specific ways of doing things, and we want to show them proper respect." "But if they were really Father's friends, wouldn't they care more about who we are than what we wear?" Isaac asked from the doorway, his arms crossed with skeptical precision. Of all her children, he possessed the most developed sense of political awareness, instinctively understanding the games adults played even when he couldn't name them. Lorelai paused in her folding, struck by the wisdom in his question. How could she explain to a 5-year-old that the people they would meet had been complicit in her destruction? That appearances and formalities often mattered more than truth in the world they were entering. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "people judge others based on first impressions. If we look neat and respectful, they're more likely to listen to what we have to say." "What do we need to say to them?" Dermond demanded, appearing in the doorway with dirt streaks on his cheeks from practicing sword forms in the garden. His dark eyes blazed with the intensity that marked him as a natural warrior, quick to anger and slow to trust. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Lorelai set down the dress she had been folding and looked at her children, really looked at them, seeing not just the babies she had protected for 5 years, but the young people they were becoming. They deserved more than careful evasions and half-truths. "Your father's people were told lies about me," she said finally. "They believe things that aren't true, and because of those lies, I had to leave before you were born." "What kind of lies?" Lyra asked quietly, settling cross-legged on the floor with the fluid grace that marked all her movements. Her pale green eyes held depths of understanding that sometimes startled adults who expected less perception from someone so young. Lorelai's throat tightened. How could she explain the concept of political manipulation to children who had never experienced anything more complex than village disputes over garden boundaries? "They were told I couldn't have children," she said, the words scraping against her throat like broken glass. "They believed I was broken somehow. Defective." The cottage fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. 4 young faces stared at her with expressions ranging from confusion to dawning outrage. Isaac was the first to speak, and his voice tight with controlled anger. "But we're here," he said simply. "We exist. How can they believe you couldn't have children when we're standing right in front of them?" "Because they've never seen you," Lorelai replied. "They don't know you exist." The implications of this statement rippled through the room like waves. Dermon's eyes flashed dangerously, and Lorelai caught a brief glimpse of gold before he brought his emotions under control. "They called our mother a liar," Dermon said, his young voice carrying a roughness that spoke of barely contained rage. "They hurt her because of lies. And now we're going to show them the truth," Wyatt added, his dreamy expression sharpening into something more focused. "We're going to prove they were wrong." Lyra had remained silent throughout the exchange, but now she rose fluidly and crossed to where Lorelai sat. Without a word, she climbed into her mother's lap and wrapped her small arms around her neck. "You were scared to go back," Lyra whispered against her ear. "But you're going anyway, because of us." The simple statement broke something loose in Lorelai's chest. She held her daughter close, breathing in the scent of sunshine and wildflowers that always seemed to cling to Lyra's hair. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said, and realized with surprise that it was true. "I have the 4 strongest, bravest children in the world. What do I have to fear?" "Will we meet him?" Isaac asked quietly. "Our father?" The question she had been dreading hung between them like a bridge she wasn't ready to cross. How could she explain that their father was alive, powerful, and completely unaware of their existence? How could she prepare them for the possibility that he might reject them just as he had rejected her? "Perhaps," she said carefully. "He's a very important man, with many responsibilities. Even if we see him, we might not have a chance to speak with him privately." "But he'll see us," Dermon said with grim satisfaction. "He'll see what he missed, what he lost when he listened to lies." The fierce protectiveness in his young voice reminded Lorelai painfully of Marmon at that age. She had seen portraits of him as a child, all stubborn jaw and blazing eyes. Her son had inherited more than just his father's coloring. He had inherited his sense of justice and his inability to tolerate deception. "What if he doesn't want to know us?" Wyatt asked, giving voice to the fear that had been eating at Lorelai's heart since she made her decision to attend the ceremony. "Then that's his loss," Isaac declared before Lorelai could respond. "We don't need anyone who doesn't want us. We have each other, and we have Mama." The simple loyalty in his voice brought tears to Lorelai's eyes. Her children had been shaped by exile into something stronger than royal privilege could have created. They understood that family was built through love and choice, not just blood and obligation. "You're right," she said softly. "We do have each other. Whatever happens on this journey, that won't change." As the afternoon progressed, the cottage filled with the organized chaos of preparation. Clothes were selected and packed with care. Medicines were wrapped in oiled cloth, and small treasures were chosen to bring comfort during the journey ahead. But it was the moments between tasks that revealed the true significance of their departure. Isaac spent long minutes standing before the small mirror in the main room, studying his reflection with the intensity of someone trying to memorize his own face. Derman practiced his swordwork with unusual focus, as if preparing for battles he couldn't yet name. Lyra gathered seeds from her garden with the methodical care of someone preserving something precious. And Wyatt sat by the window, sketching pictures of wolves running under starlit skies. As evening approached, Lorelei gathered her children around the fire for what might be their last quiet meal in the cottage that had sheltered them for 5 years. The simple stew and fresh bread tasted different somehow. They waited with the knowledge that everything familiar was about to change. "Are you nervous?" Lyra asked as they cleared the dishes together. "Yes," Lorelei admitted. "But I'm also excited. You 4 deserve to know where you come from, and you deserve to take your rightful place in the world." "What if our rightful place isn't with our father's people?" Isaac asked thoughtfully. "What if we don't belong there?" Lorelei paused in her washing, considering the question seriously. Her children had grown up free from the constraints and expectations of royal life. They had learned to value honesty over politics, loyalty over advantage, and love over duty. The world they were entering operated by different rules entirely. "Then we'll make our own place," she said finally. "We'll show them what strength really looks like. And we'll make them question everything they thought they knew about worth and belonging." As they prepared for bed, climbing the ladder to the loft that had housed them through countless peaceful nights, Lorelei felt the weight of the future settling around them like a cloak. Tomorrow would begin a journey that would test everything they had built together, challenge every assumption they had lived by. But tonight, they were still just a family sharing stories, and gentle teasing as they settled into sleep. Tonight, they were still safe in the world they had created together, protected by love and distance from the complications that awaited them. Lorelei lay awake long after her children's breathing had evened into the deep rhythms of sleep, staring up at the wooden beams that had sheltered them through seasons of growth and change. And in a few hours, they would begin the journey back to Crimson Dawn Pack, back to the place where her heart had been broken and her life had been forever altered. But she was no longer the young, naive Luna who had fled in shame and desperation. She was a woman who had survived exile, raised 4 extraordinary children, and built a new life from nothing. She was someone who had learned that strength came not from titles or bloodlines, but from the courage to protect what mattered most. And what mattered most was sleeping peacefully in the loft above her, breathing softly in the darkness, trusting her to guide them safely through whatever challenges lay ahead. Tomorrow, the world would meet the children of Marmon Richmond, and nothing would ever be the same. Dawn broke gray and misty over Shadowvale, painting the cottage and surrounding forest in shades of silver and pearl. Lorelei woke before her children, as had become her habit over the years, and lay still for a moment listening to their peaceful breathing from the loft above. Soon, this gentle morning routine would be replaced by the uncertainties of travel and the complex negotiations awaiting them at Crimson Dawn Pack. She dressed quietly in her traveling clothes, a simple dark blue dress that had seen better days but still maintained an air of dignity. As she braided her long auburn hair, she caught her reflection in the small mirror and paused, studying the face that looked back at her. 5 years of exile had changed her in ways beyond the few lines around her eyes and the subtle streaks of silver in her hair. And there was a strength there now that hadn't existed during her pampered years as a young Luna, a hardness earned through survival and sacrifice. The woman in the mirror was someone who could face an alpha king and demand answers. The woman in the mirror was someone who would fight for her children's future with every breath in her body. "Mama?" Wyatt's sleepy voice drifted down from the loft. "Is it time?" "Yes, little one," she called softly. "Time to begin our adventure." The cottage came alive with the controlled chaos of final preparations as 4 children emerged from the loft, their hair tousled and their faces bright with excitement. They had slept in their traveling clothes to save time, and now they moved with the efficient coordination of a pack preparing for journey. Isaac took charge of distributing portions of bread and dried fruit for their morning meal, his natural leadership abilities evident in the way his siblings automatically deferred to his organization. Derman checked and rechecked their small pack of belongings, his warrior's instincts already alert to the requirements of travel. Lyra gathered the last of her pressed flowers and healing herbs, wrapping them carefully in soft cloth. And Wyatt stood at the window, watching the mist rise from the forest with the dreamy intensity that marked his deepest thoughts. "How far is it to where we're going?" Dermot asked around a mouthful of bread. 3 days by foot, Lorelei replied, shouldering her own travel pack. "We'll stay in inns along the way. Oh, and I'll tell you stories about the places we pass through." "Stories about father?" Lyra asked hopefully. Lorelei's heart clenched, but she nodded. "Yes, stories about your father, and about the place where I lived before you were born." They left the cottage as the sun finally broke through the morning mist, casting golden light across the garden where they had played and learned for 5 years. Lorelei locked the door with fingers that trembled only slightly, then turned her back on the life she had built, and began walking toward the uncertainty that awaited them on the main road. The children fell into travel formation without being asked, Isaac ranging slightly ahead to scout the path, Dermot bringing up the rear to watch for followers, Lyra walking beside her mother, and Wyatt wandering from side to side to investigate anything that caught his interest. It was a formation born of instinct rather than training, the natural behavior of young wolves protecting their pack. "Tell us about the castle," Isaac called back as they reached the main road. "What did it look like when you lived there?" Lorelei felt memories rise unbidden as she began to describe Crimson Dawn Keep, the soaring towers of black stone that seemed to scrape the sky, the great hall with its massive fireplace and tapestries depicting centuries of Richmond family history, the gardens where she had walked with Marmon during their courtship. "It sounds beautiful," Lyra said wistfully. "Were you happy there?" "For a while," Lorelei admitted. "When I first arrived, everything seemed like a fairy tale. I was young and in love, and I thought that was enough to overcome any obstacle." "What changed?" Isaac asked, his perceptive mind already working to understand the complexities of adult relationships. Lorelei considered how to explain the slow poisoning of trust that had characterized the final months of her time at Crimson Dawn. How Marmon's mother had whispered doubts in his ear, how court physicians had produced false evidence, how political pressures had gradually eroded the foundation of their relationship. "People started telling lies," she said finally. "And sometimes, when people hear lies often enough, they start to believe them instead of trusting what they know in their hearts." "But you always taught us that truth wins in the end," Wyatt observed, pausing to examine a butterfly that had landed on a roadside flower. "You said lies have short legs and can't run very far." His innocent faith in justice brought a smile to Lorelei's lips despite the gravity of their situation. "Truth does win, little wolf. It just sometimes takes longer than we'd like." They walked in comfortable conversation for several hours, the children's endless questions providing distraction from the anxiety building in Lorelei's chest. As the morning progressed, they began to encounter other travelers on the road, merchants heading to market, farmers bringing goods to town, families journeying to visit relatives. But it was near midday when they encountered their first fellow travelers bound for Crimson Dawn Pack. A wealthy merchant's caravan had paused to rest their horses at a roadside inn, and Lorelei recognized the quality of their clothes and the pack symbols on their wagons immediately. "Stay close," she murmured to her children as they approached the inn. "And remember what I taught you about listening more than speaking." The inn's common room buzzed with conversation as travelers shared news and speculation about the upcoming royal mating ceremony. Lorelei settled her children at a corner table and ordered simple meals, hoping to blend into the background while gathering information about what awaited them at the capital. "I hear the bride is a beauty," one merchant was saying to his companion. "Golden hair like spun silk, and a dowry that includes 3 mining territories." "A practical choice for His Majesty," another voice agreed. "The Richmond line needs strong alliances, especially after the unfortunate business with his first mate." Lorelei's blood ran cold. They were discussing her, talking about her destruction as if it were simply a political inconvenience rather than the shattering of a human life. "What happened to his first mate?" a younger voice asked, clearly seeking gossip. "Terrible business," the first merchant replied, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. She was barren, you see, completely unable to produce heirs. The king kept her for nearly 2 years before finally accepting the truth and casting her out. I heard she threw herself from the cliffs rather than live with the shame, someone else added. They never found the body. Lorelai's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. And so that was the story they were telling. That she had committed suicide rather than face her supposed failure. It was a neat narrative that painted Marmon as the tragic hero, forced to make difficult decisions for the good of his pack. Mama, Lara whispered, her empathic abilities picking up the waves of anger and pain radiating from her mother. You're upset. I'm fine, Lorelai managed through gritted teeth, though her children's enhanced senses would detect the lie immediately. Isaac's gray eyes had taken on a dangerous glint as he processed the conversation happening around them. Even at 5 years old, he understood enough to grasp that these people were talking about his mother with casual cruelty. They're wrong, he said quietly, his young voice carrying absolute conviction. Yeah, everything they're saying is wrong. Yes, Lorelai agreed, forcing her voice to remain steady. They are wrong, and soon, everyone will know it. They finished their meal in tense silence and returned to the road, leaving the merchant caravan to their gossip and speculation. But the encounter had changed something fundamental about their journey. The children now understood that they were walking into a world where their mother was viewed as a failure, a cautionary tale about the consequences of disappointing an alpha king. Are people going to say mean things about you when we get there? Wyatt asked as they walked, his innocent question cutting straight to the heart of Lorelai's fears. Probably, she admitted. But remember what I've always taught you. Other people's opinions don't change who you are, but they don't change what's true. And we know what's true, Dermot said fiercely. We know you're the strongest, bravest person in the world. We know you saved us and protected us and made us strong. His passionate defense brought tears to Lorelai's eyes. Her children had grown up understanding that they were different, special, but they had never been made to feel ashamed of their circumstances. They had been raised with love and confidence, taught that their worth came from their actions and their character, rather than their bloodline or status. What if our father believes the lies too? Isaac asked quietly as they made camp that evening beside a small stream. What if he looks at us and sees proof of his own mistake? The question hung in the air like smoke from their small campfire. Lorelai stared into the flames, remembering the last time she had seen Marmon, the cold rejection in his eyes, the disgust in his voice as he spoke the words that had shattered her world. Then we'll show him the truth, she said finally. We'll show him what he lost when he chose to believe lies over love. And if he still doesn't want us? Lyra asked, curling up in her bedroll with the fluid grace that marked all her movements. Then he'll have proven himself unworthy of us, Isaac declared before Lorelai could respond. We don't need anyone who can't see how amazing we are. His fierce loyalty brought a smile to Lorelai's face despite the gravity of their situation. Her children had been shaped by exile into something stronger than royal privilege could have created. They understood that family was built through love and choice, not just blood and obligation. As they settled into sleep beneath the star-scattered sky, Lorelai felt the weight of the future pressing down around them like a physical presence. Tomorrow would bring them within sight of Crimson Dawn Keep, and the day after that would see them walking through gates she had fled in desperation 5 years earlier. But she was no longer the broken woman who had stumbled away into exile. She was a mother who had raised 4 extraordinary children against impossible odds. She was someone who had learned that strength came not from titles or bloodlines, but from the courage to protect what mattered most. And tomorrow, the world would begin to understand exactly what Marmon Richmond had lost when he chose pride over love, lies over truth. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns as 4 alpha children slept peacefully beside their mother, trusting her to guide them safely through whatever challenges lay ahead. And in the darkness, Lorelai Richmond made a silent promise to the night sky and the moon goddess above. Her children would take their rightful place in the world, and the truth would finally, inevitably, win. The towers of Crimson Dawn Keep rose from the mountains like black fingers clawing at the morning sky, their stone surfaces gleaming with moisture from the heavy mist that clung to the peaks. From their position on the winding mountain road, Lorelei and her children could see the entire sprawling complex spread across the plateau. The main keep with its soaring spires, the outer walls that enclosed training grounds and gardens, and the smaller buildings that housed servants and craftsmen. It was exactly as beautiful and imposing as Lorelei remembered, and exactly as painful to see again. "It's huge," Wyatt breathed, his pale blue eyes wide with wonder as he took in the scope of the castle that had been his mother's home for 2 years. "It's a fortress," Dermot observed with the tactical awareness that came naturally to his warrior nature. "Built for defense, not just beauty." Isaac said nothing, but Lorelei could see him studying the layout with the same strategic intelligence that had made his father such an effective leader. Even at 5 years old, her eldest son understood that knowledge was power, and power would be necessary for whatever lay ahead. "Are you ready for this?" Lyra asked quietly, slipping her small hand into her mother's as they stood looking down at the place that had once been home. Lorelei squeezed her daughter's fingers gently, drawing strength from the contact. As ready as anyone can be for facing the past. They resumed their descent toward the keep, joining the steady stream of travelers converging on Crimson Dawn for the royal mating ceremony. Merchants with wagons full of goods, nobles in fine carriages, common pack members arriving on foot, all flowing toward the castle like tributaries feeding a great river. As they drew closer to the main gates, Lorelei began to recognize faces in the crowd. Nobles she had once dined with, servants who had attended her during her time as Luna, warriors who had sworn loyalty to her as their alpha's mate. Some showed flickers of recognition as they passed, at their eyes widening with shock before quickly looking away. Others stared openly, whispering to their companions as they tried to process the impossible sight of the supposedly dead Luna, walking among them with 4 children at her side. "People keep staring at us," Dermot muttered, his young face darkening with suspicion. "Why are they looking at us like that?" "Because they think they're seeing a ghost," Lorelei replied softly. "They were told I was dead, remember?" The massive gates of Crimson Dawn Keep loomed ahead, flanked by guards in the crimson and gold livery of the royal household. Lorelei felt her heart hammering against her ribs as they approached, memories flooding back of the last time she had passed through these gates, stumbling away in disgrace. A cast out with nothing but the clothes on her back and a broken heart in her chest. "State your business," the guard captain commanded as they reached the checkpoint, his hand resting casually on his sword hilt. "My name is Lorelei Richmond," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent courtyard. "I've been invited to attend the royal mating ceremony." The effect of her words was immediate and electric. Guards froze in recognition, their faces going pale as they processed what they were seeing. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as the name rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped into still water. Lorelei Richmond, the Barren Luna, the woman who had supposedly thrown herself from the cliffs rather than face her shame. Standing before them alive, healthy, and accompanied by 4 children whose bearing and features marked them as something extraordinary. The guard captain stared at her with wide, confused eyes, clearly struggling to reconcile the woman before him with the tragic story he had been told. His gaze dropped to the children clustered around her, taking in their obvious health and strength, their calm confidence despite being surrounded by staring strangers. That's impossible," he managed finally. "You're supposed to be dead?" Lorelei supplied helpfully. "I'm afraid the reports of my demise were greatly exaggerated. Now, may we enter? My children are tired from our journey." The captain looked around desperately, as if seeking guidance from superiors who were nowhere to be found. The crowd pressed closer, drawn by the unfolding drama, and their whispered conversations creating a buzz of excitement and speculation. "I'll need to verify your identity," the captain stammered. "And the children, where did they come from?" "They came from me," Lorelei replied with quiet dignity. "As children generally do, The simple statement hit the assembled crowd like a thunderbolt. If Lorelei Richmond had children, healthy, obviously well-cared-for children, then everything they had been told about her supposed barrenness was a lie. The implications rippled through the courtyard like shock waves, faces turning pale as people began to grasp the magnitude of what they were witnessing. "How old are they?" someone called from the crowd, their voice tight with growing understanding. 5 years, Lorelei replied clearly, making sure her answer carried to every listening ear. Born 8 months after I left Crimson Dawn. The math was simple enough for anyone to calculate. 5 years since her exile, 8 months of pregnancy. These children had been conceived while she was still Luna, still mated to the Alpha King who had cast her out for being barren. "Impossible," breathed a familiar voice from the crowd. Lorelei turned to see Lady Miranda Voss, one of the court nobles who had been particularly cruel during her final days at the keep. "The physicians confirmed you were barren. Master Ralph Doolin himself examined you." "Master Ralph Doolin lied," Lorelei said simply, her voice cutting through the crowd's murmurs like a blade. "As did others who had reasons to want me gone." Lady Miranda's face went white, then red, as she processed the accusation. Around them, the crowd pressed closer, drawn by the unfolding drama like moths to flame. Guards looked uncertainly between their duty to maintain order and their shock at the revelations unfolding before them. It was Isaac who broke the tense standoff, stepping forward with the natural authority that marked him as his father's son. Even at 5 years old, he carried himself with a dignity that commanded attention, his gray eyes, so much like Marmon's, sweeping the assembled crowd with cool assessment. "We've traveled far to be here," he said, his young voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "Will you turn away the children of your Alpha King?" The statement landed like a dropped sword, the implication hanging in the air for everyone to understand. These weren't just any children, they were royal heirs. The bloodline everyone thought had been lost when their mother was cast out in disgrace. The guard captain looked around wildly, clearly out of his depth in handling a situation that required political judgment beyond his authority. Finally, he made the only decision he could make. "Escort them to the guest quarters," he ordered his men. "Inform the steward of their arrival. Let others decide what to do with them." As they were led through the familiar corridors of Crimson Dawn Keep, Lorelei felt the weight of history pressing down around her. These halls had once rung with her laughter, had witnessed her hopes and dreams for the future she would build with Marmon. Now they echoed with whispered speculation about her return, and what it meant for the royal family. The guest quarters they were assigned were comfortable, but modest. He clearly chosen to house them without implying any particular status or recognition. As servants brought water for washing and simple foods for their meal, Lorelei could see them stealing glances at her children, trying to reconcile what they were seeing with what they had been told to believe. "The resemblance is unmistakable," one servant whispered to another as they prepared the beds. "Look at the eldest boy's eyes. Those are Richmond eyes if I've ever seen them." "But how is it possible?" the other replied. "We were told she was barren. The physicians swore to it." "Physicians can be bought," the first servant said grimly. "Just like anyone else with enough gold to tempt them." Their hushed conversation confirmed what Lorelei had long suspected, that her exile had not been the result of medical truth, but of political maneuvering by people who had wanted her removed from power. The knowledge burned in her chest like a coal, fueling the determination that had brought her back to face her accusers. "Mama," Lyra said softly as they settled in for the evening. "The castle feels sad. There are so many unhappy people here." Her daughter's empathic abilities were clearly overwhelmed by the complex emotions swirling through Crimson Dawn Keep. Years of political intrigue, suppressed guilt, and careful lies had created an atmosphere that would be difficult for anyone sensitive to emotional undercurrents. "Yes," Lorelei agreed, smoothing Lyra's hair gently. "This place has seen too many secrets and too much pain, but sometimes exposing the truth is the only way to begin healing." As her children settled into sleep in the unfamiliar beds, while Lorelai stood at the window overlooking the courtyard where she had been publicly rejected 5 years earlier. Tomorrow would bring the royal mating ceremony, the moment when Marmon would claim Lady Kathleen Mills as his new Luna before the assembled pack. But tonight, word was spreading through the castle like wildfire. Lorelai Richmond had returned from the dead, and she had brought proof that everything they thought they knew about her exile had been built on lies. Tomorrow, the truth would finally have its day. The great hall of Crimson Dawn Keep had been transformed for the royal mating ceremony, its stone walls draped with tapestries in crimson and gold, its massive fireplace decorated with arrangements of late autumn flowers. Hundreds of candles cast dancing shadows across the assembled crowd. Nobles in their finest silks, warriors in ceremonial leathers, common pack members dressed in their best clothes to witness their alpha's new beginning. Lorelai entered the hall with her children at her side, their simple but clean traveling clothes marking them as outsiders among the elaborate finery surrounding them. She had deliberately chosen to dress modestly, knowing that drawing attention to their material status would distract from the more important revelations to come. The effect of their appearance was immediate and electric. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as heads turned to track their progress through the crowd. Whispers followed in their wake like ripples spreading across still water, the news of their arrival having spread through the castle during the night. "Is that really her?" someone whispered. "Those children. Look at their eyes. How is this possible?" Lorelai kept her gaze fixed straight ahead as they made their way to the section reserved for former pack members, but her enhanced hearing caught fragments of conversation that confirmed what she had suspected. Their presence was causing fundamental questions to be raised about everything that had happened 5 years earlier. The great doors at the far end of the hall swung open with ceremonial precision, and the assembled crowd rose to their feet as the royal procession entered. First came the honor guard in their finest uniforms, then court officials carrying the symbols of royal authority, and finally the bride and groom themselves. Lady Kathleen Mills was indeed beautiful, just as the merchants had claimed. Her golden hair was arranged in elaborate braids threaded with pearls, and her white gown sparkled with embroidered silver thread that caught the candlelight like captured starlight. She moved with the practiced grace of someone trained from birth for this moment, her smile serene and confident as she acknowledged the crowd's respectful applause. But it was Marmon who drew Lorelai's attention completely, just as he always had. 5 years had changed him, adding weight to his shoulders and deeper lines around his gray eyes. The young alpha she had fallen in love with had been replaced by someone harder, more distant, carrying the burden of kingship like armor that could never be removed. He wore ceremonial robes of deep crimson trimmed with gold, and the crown of his ancestors rested on his dark hair with the weight of centuries of tradition. But as his gaze swept across the assembled crowd, acknowledging their presence with royal dignity, his eyes found hers across the vast space of the hall. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Marmon stumbled slightly, his composure cracking as he processed what he was seeing. 5 years dissolved in an instant as their gazes locked, and Lorelai saw recognition, confusion, and something that might have been pain flicker across his features before he mastered his expression once more. But then his gaze dropped to the children at her side, and whatever control he had maintained shattered completely. His face went white as he took in their obvious health and strength, their unmistakable resemblance to his own bloodline. Isaac stood with unconscious authority, his gray eyes meeting his father's with unflinching directness. A Derman's warrior stance and defensive positioning around his family spoke of protective instincts that ran deeper than training. Lyra's ethereal beauty and calm observation marked her as someone touched by power beyond the ordinary. And Wyatt's dreamy intelligence and obvious comfort with his own abilities suggested gifts that defied conventional explanation. 4 children. 4 healthy, strong, obviously intelligent children who should not have existed if everything Marmon had been told about their mother was true. Lady Kathleen had noticed her groom's distraction and followed his gaze to where Lorelai stood with her impossible family. The bride's confident smile faltered as she took in the implications of what she was seeing, her political instincts recognizing a threat to everything she had worked to achieve. The ceremony proceeded with increasing tension as Elder Clyde Bonner began the traditional opening words. But Lorelai could feel the attention of the entire hall focused on her small family, rather than the couple at the altar. The priest's voice seemed to come from a great distance as he spoke about eternal bonds and sacred commitments, words that carried painful irony for someone who had experienced the breaking of such promises. It was Wyatt who precipitated the crisis, his young voice cutting clearly through the ceremonial drone with innocent directness. "Mama, why is that man staring at us?" The question rang through the great hall like a bell, impossible to ignore or dismiss. Every eye turned to follow his pointing finger, which was aimed directly at Marmon on his ceremonial dais. Marmon had gone completely still, and his face a mask of shock and growing understanding. Beside him, Lady Kathleen's composure finally cracked entirely as she grasped the full implications of the situation. "Who are these children?" she demanded, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent hall. "Why are they here?" It was Isaac who answered, stepping forward with the natural authority that marked him as royal bloodline. Even at 5 years old, he carried himself with a dignity that commanded attention from adults who should have dismissed him as irrelevant. "We came to meet our father," he said simply, his gray eyes fixed on Marmon with unwavering intensity. The statement hit the assembled crowd like a thunderbolt. Gasps echoed through the hall as hundreds of people processed what they had just heard. These children, these healthy, obviously gifted children, were claiming to be the offspring of their alpha king and the woman who had been declared barren and cast out in disgrace. Marmon descended from the dais with mechanical precision, his ceremonial robes rustling around him as he approached the family who had materialized from his past like figures from a dream. The crowd parted before him, pressing back against the walls to give him space for this confrontation that would reshape everything they thought they understood about their leadership. He stopped a few feet from Isaac, father and son studying each other with identical expressions of cautious assessment. The physical resemblance was unmistakable. The same gray eyes, the same stubborn jawline, the same way of holding themselves like they were prepared to face whatever challenges arose. "Your name," Marmon said hoarsely, his royal composure barely maintained. "Isaac," his eldest son replied without flinching. "Isaac Richmond, though Mama never told us we could use that name." The confirmation of identity seemed to break something inside Marmon. He looked at Dermon next, taking in the boy's defensive stance and blazing eyes that held clear hostility toward the man who had hurt his mother. "You abandoned her," Dermon said before Marmon could speak, his young voice carrying accusation that cut like a blade. "You left her alone when she needed you most." Marmon flinched as if struck, his gaze moving to Lyra, who studied him with the unsettling perception that marked her as different from ordinary children. "You're sorry," she said softly, her empathic abilities reading emotions he was trying desperately to hide. "You've been sorry for a long time, but you didn't know why." Finally, he looked at Wyatt, who met his gaze with the dreamy directness that characterized his interactions with the world. "I've seen you in my dreams," Wyatt said matter-of-factly. "You are always sad in them. I think you are looking for us." The simple statement seemed to shatter Marmon's remaining composure. He turned to Lorelai with eyes that held years of suppressed pain and growing understanding. "How is this possible?" he whispered, his voice barely audible above the tense silence that had fallen over the hall. "You tell me," Lorelai replied, her voice steady despite the emotional storm raging in her chest. "You were the one who declared me barren. You were the one who believed the lies over your own mate bond." The accusation hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore or dismiss. Around them, the assembled crowd pressed closer, drawn by the unfolding drama that was rewriting everything they thought they knew about their royal family. From the back of the hall, a voice called out with trembling authority, "I can answer that question." All eyes turned to see Master Ralph Doolin making his way slowly through the crowd, his elderly frame supported by a walking stick, his weathered face drawn with the weight of years and guilt. The court physician who had pronounced Lorelei barren 5 years earlier looked like a man carrying an unbearable burden. "I lied," he said simply, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "I falsified the medical records. I was paid to declare Lady Lorelei barren, and I accepted the gold because I was a coward and a fool." The confession hit the crowd like a physical blow. Gasps and cries of shock echoed through the hall as hundreds of people processed the magnitude of what they were hearing. Their Alpha King had been deceived. Their former Luna had been unjustly exiled, and 4 royal heirs had been hidden from their rightful heritage. "Who paid you?" Marmon demanded, his voice cracking with barely controlled fury. Master Ralph's eyes found Lady Kathleen, who had gone deathly pale on the ceremonial dais. "The Mills family," he said quietly. "They wanted to eliminate competition for the Luna position, and they knew that declaring Lady Lorelei barren would be the surest way to remove her from consideration." Lady Kathleen's composure shattered completely. "That's a lie!" she shrieked. "Oh, he's making it up to protect her reputation." But Master Ralph was already producing a leather satchel from beneath his robes, withdrawing documents that bore official seals and signatures. "I kept copies of everything," he said grimly. The original medical records showing Lady Lorelei was perfectly healthy. Letters discussing payment. Even a draft of the rejection speech that was prepared for His Majesty to deliver. The evidence passed from hand to hand through the crowd, each document confirming what many had begun to suspect, that Lorelei's exile had been orchestrated by political enemies who had successfully manipulated their Alpha King into destroying his own family. Marmon stood frozen in the center of the chaos, his gaze moving between the documentary proof of his manipulation and the 4 children who represented everything he had lost through his blindness. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow with devastation. "What have I done?" The question hung in the air like an indictment, impossible to answer and impossible to ignore. The royal mating ceremony had become something else entirely, a moment of truth that would reshape the future of Crimson Dawn Pack and everyone who called it home. And in the center of it all stood 4 alpha children who had been hidden from the world for 5 years, finally taking their rightful place in the light. The Great Hall had erupted into chaos following Master Ralph's confession. Nobles shouting accusations while Lady Kathleen's family attempted damage control, and the common pack members struggled to process the magnitude of what had been revealed. But Marmon seemed oblivious to the turmoil surrounding him, his entire focus fixed on the family he had unknowingly lost. "Guards, clear the hall," he commanded, his voice cutting through the noise with royal authority that brooked no argument. "I need to speak with Lady Lorelei and her children privately." The crowd dispersed reluctantly, their whispered conversations continuing as they filed out of the great hall. Lady Kathleen was escorted away by her family, her elaborate wedding gown trailing behind her like the remnants of shattered dreams. Master Ralph was taken into custody pending formal charges, and his confession having sealed his fate even as it vindicated the woman he had wronged. When the massive doors finally closed, leaving only family in the vast space that had witnessed so much pain and revelation, an uncomfortable silence settled over them. Marmon stood uncertainly before the woman he had rejected and the children he had never known, clearly struggling with how to bridge the chasm his mistakes had created. It was Isaac who broke the tension, approaching his father with the direct manner that characterized all his interactions. "You need to apologize to Mama," he said firmly, his gray eyes holding no trace of childish deference. "You hurt her badly, and you need to make it right." Marmon looked down at his eldest son, his heir, and the boy who should have been raised in these halls with every advantage royal blood could provide, and felt something break inside his chest. "I don't know where to begin," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't know what words could possibly be enough." "Start with the truth," Lyra suggested quietly, her empathic abilities reading the genuine remorse radiating from the man who was genetically her father, but still a stranger to her heart. "Tell us what really happened." Marmon's gaze shifted to Lorelei, seeing her truly for the first time since her return. 5 years of exile had transformed the young Luna he remembered into someone harder, more self-possessed. shaped by struggles he could barely imagine. She stood with quiet dignity beside their children, neither approaching nor retreating, as simply waiting to see what choice he would make. "I believed lies because I wanted to believe them," he said finally, the admission scraping against his throat like broken glass. "Not because I doubted you, but because accepting the truth would have required me to fight battles I wasn't ready to face." "What battles?" Dermot demanded, his warrior instincts recognizing the language of conflict even if he didn't understand the political complexities involved. Marmon looked at his second son, seeing his own stubborn determination reflected in features that would someday command respect and loyalty from their own pack. "Against my mother's influence. Against political pressures to form alliances through marriage. All against the expectation that alpha kings should choose duty over love." "But you did choose duty," Isaac pointed out with devastating logic. "You chose to believe what was convenient instead of fighting for what was true." The accuracy of his son's assessment hit Marmon like a physical blow. "Yes," he admitted. "I chose the easy path, and it cost me everything that mattered." Lorelai had remained silent throughout this exchange, watching her children interact with their father for the first time. They showed no particular reverence for his position or power, treating him simply as an adult who needed to account for his actions. She felt a fierce pride in their strength and self-possession, even as her heart ached for the relationship they could have had if circumstances had been different. "They don't know you," she said quietly, and her first words since the hall had been cleared. "To them, you're just the man who made their mother cry in the dark when she thought they were sleeping." The simple statement seemed to devastate Marmon more completely than any elaborate accusation could have managed. He looked at his children, his intelligent, powerful, remarkable children, and realized that he was a stranger to them, defined only by the pain he had caused the most important person in their world. "How do I change that?" he asked, the question directed at Lorelai, but carrying the weight of desperate hope. "You don't," Isaac answered before his mother could speak. "We decide if we want to know you based on who you choose to be from now on." The mature wisdom in his 5-year-old son's voice brought tears to Marmon's eyes. These children had been shaped by exile into something stronger than royal privilege could have created, and they would not be impressed by titles or apologetics. Wyatt had been wandering around the great hall during this conversation, his dreamy attention caught by the tapestries and carved details that decorated the ancient space. Now he returned to the group with a question that cut to the heart of their situation. "Are we going to live here now?" he asked, his innocent curiosity focused on practical concerns rather than emotional complexities. The question hung in the air, highlighting the fundamental issue that would need to be resolved. Where did they go from here? How did a family broken by lies and political manipulation find a way to heal? "That depends," Marmon said carefully, "on whether your mother is willing to give me the chance to earn what I should have fought for 5 years ago." Lorelai studied his face, seeing genuine remorse mixed with desperate hope. The mate bond that had been damaged but never completely severed pulsed between them like a half-healed wound, carrying echoes of what they had once shared. "I'm not the same person you rejected," she said quietly. 5 years of exile changed me into someone who won't accept pretty words and empty promises. If you want a second chance, you'll have to prove you've learned something from your mistakes." "How?" he asked simply. "By choosing us first," Dermot said before his mother could answer, his young voice carrying the fierce protectiveness that defined his relationship with his family. "Not when it's easy or convenient, but when it costs you something important." The wisdom in his words seemed to surprise even Marmon, who looked at his children with growing respect for the people they had become despite his absence from their lives. "I understand," he said solemnly, "and I accept those terms." Lyra approached him then, her empathic abilities apparently detecting something in his emotional state that satisfied her careful assessment. "You mean it?" she said with quiet certainty. "You're not just saying words to get what you want." "No," Marmon agreed, kneeling to bring himself to her eye level. "I'm saying words because I finally understand what I lost, And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to build something real with all of you. The conversation that followed stretched through the afternoon as practical arrangements were discussed and emotional boundaries were established. Lorelai and the children would remain at Crimson Dawn Keep, but in their own quarters with their own servants, maintaining independence while allowing relationship to develop naturally. Marmon would formally acknowledge the children as his heirs and begin their education in royal responsibilities, but only at a pace they felt comfortable with. Most importantly, he would never again make decisions about their family based on political pressure or outside manipulation. As evening approached and the children settled into their new quarters, Lorelai found herself alone with Marmon for the first time since her return. And they stood together in the garden where they had once walked as young lovers, the scent of late autumn roses carrying memories of simpler times. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," Marmon said quietly, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains where the sun was setting in shades of gold and crimson. "But I want you to know that not a day has passed without me regretting the choice I made." "Regret isn't enough," Lorelai replied, though her voice held no anger, only tired truth. "Our children deserved better than an absent father, and I deserved better than a mate who chose convenience over trust." "I know," he said simply, "and I know that earning your trust again may take longer than I have left to live, but I'm willing to try if you'll let me." Lorelai looked at him, seeing past the crown and the royal robes to the man beneath, older now, marked by years of poor choices and their consequences, but perhaps finally wise enough to understand what truly mattered. "We'll start slowly," she said finally. "Day by day, choice by choice. You'll prove yourself through actions, not words, and our children will decide for themselves what kind of relationship they want with their father." Relief flooded Marmon's features, though he was careful not to assume more than her words offered. "Thank you," he said simply, "for coming back, for giving me the chance to try to make this right." 6 months later, the transformation of Crimson Dawn Keep was evident in ways both large and small. The children had adapted to royal life with the resilience of youth, though they maintained the independence and strength that exile had taught them. Isaac showed natural talent for leadership and strategy, already demonstrating the qualities that would make him a formidable alpha someday. Dermot excelled in combat training while never losing his fierce protectiveness toward his family. Lyra's gifts as a healer and empath made her beloved among the pack members, who sought her gentle wisdom for their troubles. And Wyatt's prophetic dreams had proven surprisingly accurate, making him a valuable advisor despite his young age. Marmon had kept every promise he made, choosing his family over political convenience time and again. When nobles questioned his decision to elevate children born in exile, he defended them publicly. When marriage alliances were suggested for political gain, he refused to consider any arrangement that didn't honor his commitment to Lorelai. When traditional protocols conflicted with his children's needs, he changed the protocols. Most importantly, he had proven himself as a father through patience and consistency, earning the trust of 4 remarkable children one day at a time. The second mating ceremony was held on a spring evening when wildflowers bloomed throughout the castle gardens, and the air carried the promise of new beginnings. This time, there were no elaborate crowds or political spectacles, just family and close friends gathering to witness vows spoken with full knowledge of their meaning. Lorelai wore a simple white dress that highlighted her natural beauty, rather than competing with it. Her auburn hair crowned with flowers that Isaac and Lyra had picked that morning. But Marmon had chosen to wear the ceremonial robes of his ancestors, but he had set aside the crown that marked his royal status, approaching their reunion as a man rather than a king. The children stood as witnesses, their presence transforming what could have been merely a political arrangement into something deeper and more meaningful. They had chosen to accept Marmon as their father, not because of his bloodline or his power, but because he had proven himself worthy of their trust through consistent action. As Elder Clyde spoke the ancient words that would bind them together once more, Lorelai felt the mate bond strengthening between them. Not the naive passion of their youth, but something tempered by experience and hardened by trial. This love had been tested by separation, betrayal, and years of pain, and it had survived to become something stronger than either of them could have imagined. When Marmon kissed her to seal their renewed vows, their children cheered with genuine joy. No longer the hidden family forced to live in shadows, but the acknowledged heirs of Crimson Dawn Pack, secure in their place and proud of their heritage. That night, as Lorelai stood on the battlements overlooking the territory that was once again her home, she reflected on the long journey that had brought them to this moment. 5 years of exile had been painful, but they had also been necessary, forging her children into something remarkable while teaching her that true strength came not from avoiding hardship, but from choosing to rebuild after devastating loss. Marmon approached quietly, slipping his arms around her waist as they looked out over the moonlit landscape together. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Lorelai leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat through the layers of cloth between them. "No," she said with quiet certainty. "Every choice led us here, to this family, to this moment. I wouldn't change any of it. Even the painful parts?" "Especially the painful parts," she replied, turning in his arms to meet his gaze. "They made us who we needed to become." From their bedroom window came the sound of muffled laughter as their children settled into sleep, their voices carrying the easy affection of siblings who had learned to depend on each other through every challenge. The sound filled Lorelai's heart with profound contentment. They had not just survived their trials, they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. The future stretched ahead of them, filled with the normal challenges of raising alpha children and governing a pack, but also bright with the promise of love that had been tested by fire and proven unbreakable. They had learned that true strength came not from avoiding conflict, but from choosing love over convenience, truth over comfort, and family over all the glittering temptations that power could offer. Under the light of the full moon that had witnessed their original vows so many years earlier, Marmon and Lorelai Richmond stood together as partners in every sense of the word, bound not just by ceremony and tradition, but by the deeper ties forged through forgiveness, growth, and the shared commitment to protect what mattered most. Their children were safe, and acknowledged, and loved. Their pack was stronger for having learned the cost of choosing lies over truth, and their own relationship had been rebuilt on foundations solid enough to last for generations. The woman who had fled Crimson Dawn in shame and desperation was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that true power came not from titles or bloodlines, but from the courage to fight for love, even when the battle seemed impossible to win. And in the quiet of that perfect night, surrounded by the family she had protected and the love she had reclaimed, Lorelai Richmond finally understood that sometimes the longest journeys led exactly where they were meant to go. Thank you for joining me on this journey of love, betrayal, and redemption. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe for more tales of werewolf romance and family bonds that survive every trial. Until next time, may your own love stories be strong enough to overcome any obstacle.